Pre-Genius Mapping Lesson 2. Dun, 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 dun. The Scooby-Doo technique. Kids, we are building off of Lesson 1 in the Pre-Genius Mapping course. We are getting some basic information that a teacher will never teach you for some reason. Why? Because they want you to do everything the hard way. In the genius concept, the genius style of thinking, Professor Thomas wants you to understand things in the simplest manner. Let's go ahead and see what the heck the Scooby-Doo technique is. First things first, writers have been taught in order to keep a passage interesting, a writer should constantly change vocabulary words that refer to the central concept. That means throughout the passage, they're going to say the same thing, but they're going to use different vocabulary words. For example, if it says in paragraph number 1, Scooby-Doo is hungry. Paragraph 2, they're going to have to say that same thing, but they're going to switch it around and make it sound a little different. Scooby may say, hey, is it lunchtime yet? Well, when you say, is it lunchtime yet, you can assume that Scooby-Doo is hungry. And in paragraph number 1, it said the same thing. They use the central theme to say the same thing, but use different vocabulary words. Here it is. Write this down because this is paramount for this course, for the Genius Mapping course, and for ACT when you get there. Scooby-Doo technique says the author is going to say the same thing throughout the same passage, but they're going to use different vocabulary words. Let's go ahead and have a look at our paragraph from lesson number 1. Remember the passage about Calvin. Let's go ahead and scroll on down here. First things first, our topic sentence. It says, Calvin, it's our subject, it's our main noun. Throughout the details, we're going to have to continue talking about Calvin. It says he is very mechanically inclined as a 6th grader. Inclined is the verb. That's the action. Let's label it. Noun, Calvin, verb, action. Remember, a noun is a person, place, or a thing. Now, throughout the rest of the paragraph, we're going to have to talk about Calvin, but the author is going to use different words to say the same thing. Once again, this is called the Scooby-Doo technique. Let's see if it's true. When we go down over here into detail number 1, do we indeed still talk about Calvin? And yes, we do. We say he. He and Calvin say the same thing. Scooby-Doo. The verb up here is mechanically inclined. We're going to have to say that same concept in detail number 1. Do we? Well, when you make a wooden birdhouse, made is mechanics, and a birdhouse is putting it together. You're making something. That's mechanically doing something. That says the same thing. We go on to detail number 2. When he was 9, he refers back to Calvin again, and it even says his name here, Calvin and he. Scooby-Doo says the same thing, uses different words. He designed. When you design something, that is a Scooby-Doo for saying the same thing as being mechanically inclined. We go to paragraph detail number 3, and you see that now we say he. Now that he refers back to Calvin again, he's taking geometry, mechanically inclined, and geometry say the same concept, but they use different words. And it says Calvin again. Main subject is working on creating. When you're creating something, you're making something. And when you're creating or making something, that is mechanically inclined. And here it reinforces an aerodynamic airplane that actually flies. That's mechanically inclined. Detail number 4, the youthful prodigy. Don't get tripped up here. We cannot start talking about something new here. The youthful prodigy has to be Calvin, according to the Scooby-Doo technique. uses the same words, the same concept that uses different words. He was exalted. It's a vocabulary word. He was exalted by his classmates and the recipient of an award. Well, what do you think that the word exalted has to mean? If you win an award, that means the word exalted has to be a positive word. We'll learn that in the next lesson called the Good Stinky Rule. And robotics, in Robotics Club, you are going to make stuff, robots in particular, and robots move, so that's mechanical. There you have it. We go to the conclusion. Scooby-Doo technique says the same thing. We use different words. Here's what it says. The life of an 11-year-old. Who is the 11-year-old? The 11-year-old is Calvin, Scooby-Doo, and gadget inventor is Calvin again. And when you're a gadget inventor, you are working with, come on, red pen, mechanically moving parts. What a mess! The concept to take away from this particular example is the Scooby-Doo technique. The author has been trained to write in a way that says the same thing, but to keep it interesting for the reader. You're going to use different words to say the same concept throughout the passage. Don't get tripped up by reading every single word. Search out deeper meaning for words. If you don't know what that word means, tell yourself it has to say what comes from that topic sentence. So once you start thinking in this particular manner here, you're going to see that things are going to make more sense to you as you begin reading. Now, what we're going to do here, I'm going to pause the video here, and we're going to come on back with something a little bit trickier. We're going to go into high school material here. This is actual ACT passage we're going to work with, and I'm going to show you exactly the same thing on harder material using the Scooby-Doo technique here. So let's go ahead and pause real quick. We'll come on back in 2 seconds. Back again, here we are with an ACT passage. It's above and beyond what you are comfortable with. Let's go ahead and make it super easy. First things first, we notice that it is an argumentative essay written in paragraph format. Take a look. 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph, 3 paragraph, and so forth. If you look here, there's probably 10, 11, 12, 13 different paragraphs. We know from this lesson the Scooby-Doo technique. Scooby-Doo says the same thing but uses different words. How do we write paragraphs? Topic sentence followed by details. We take a look at the first paragraph here and notice that the topic sentence says, on September 8th, 1966, when NBC premiered its futuristic series, Star Trek, few were watching. First things first, our topic sentence contains a noun. The noun is Star Trek. And the action is it had few watching. Not very many people were watching. So this article has to continue talking about Star Trek. Here's the action of people watching it or not watching it. We go to the next paragraph using the Scooby-Doo technique. Lo and behold, again, Star Trek. Star Trek is related to Star Trek. And then it says, 2 years later, Star Trek somehow had captured the imagination of the viewer. Capturing an imagination and viewer relates back to watching. Same thing, Scooby-Doo. Go to the next paragraph. We search it out. Are we continually talking about Star Trek in the next paragraph and people watching it? Yes or no? According to the Scooby-Doo technique, we can't just start talking about something new. We have to continue on with that theme. We take a look over here. It says, perhaps more than other television series. A television series is a Scooby-Doo for, take a wild guess. It's Star Trek. It even says Star Trek right there, kids. It benefited greatly from blah, 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 being there at the right time. Being there at the right time. Where were they being? They were being in a place called the television set. Scooby-Doo says the same thing. Star Trek and people watching it. We go down to the next paragraph. Although as a structural clue, you will learn about these in one of the lessons in the next few lessons. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5. We see new programs. What kind of programs? TV programs. And we can assume that the TV program they are referring to is going to be Star Trek. Let's go ahead and scroll down and see, are we still talking about Star Trek in the next couple paragraphs? We go to the next paragraph and take a look. Star Trek and people watching it. Star Trek was different. How was it different? Something to do with the programming on TV. We go over here. Indeed, it was precisely because of the futuristic storyline of Star Trek. Futuristic storyline. Maybe people were watching it because that sounds cool. It says the same thing, uses different words. We go to the top of the next passage, the next column here, and we're looking for Star Trek and why reasons people are watching Star Trek. We come over here. It says 30 years Gene Roddenberry's fantasy space concept. Fantasy space concept ties back into Star Trek. And who do you think Gene Roddenberry is? He is the writer of Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry is another word for Star Trek. Space concept, another meaning for the concept of Star Trek. We go over here and we continue on down and we see we're still talking about Star Trek. We go to the next paragraph. Star Trek. Viewers. Goes back to what we saw earlier. You see, kids, it's really not that hard. What you do is in the front of your head, once you understand what the concept is that they're going to talk about, the main subject matter, and the action on that subject matter, look for it when you go into the next paragraph. It's going to be a lot easier for you to understand and follow as you go through. We look at the final paragraph, has a topic sentence, and of course it has a conclusion. Star Trek again, television. That goes back all the way up here to viewer. Star Trek goes all the way back up to Star Trek. And then down at the very bottom is the conclusion. And of course, we see Star Trek again and talks about television. It says the same thing, but uses different words. Kids, write it down. Scooby-Who? Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo once again, kids. You're going to say the same thing, but use different words throughout the passage. So once you understand what the main subject is, look for it and expect the author to switch the vocabulary words around. That's it for lesson 2, Scooby-Doo technique. We will see you in lesson number 3. Bye for now.